Hello, and welcome to 40 After 40. 40 life lessons learned and earned by 40. My name is Seanice Kacungira.
And I'm Nancy Kacungira. We're sisters who've walked very different paths, but we seem to have arrived at some of the same revelations now that we've both crossed that 40-year-old milestone.
That's right. So, this conversation was born from our private conversations. You know, those late night talks where you compare notes about how differently you see the world now compared to when you were younger. Just us, or maybe you can relate. But we realized that the conversations we were having were valuable enough to share.
And that's why we're here. We hope that you enjoy us sharing. And we're just going to be getting into some of the things that we're reflecting on having learned now that we are 40. And hopefully, we do pass on some wisdom because we do think some of these insights are worth sharing and worth hearing.
Right. So usually once you pass the age of, I don't know, it's different for different people, but like in your mid 20s, some people even in the early 20s, one question that starts to weigh on one is how do I choose who to marry? Or
Hmm.
maybe sometimes the question doesn't even cross your mind and you just get into it and then you realize halfway through, oh my goodness, what did I do? So, how do you choose the right person to marry? How do we even tackle this topic, Nance?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you see this often that, a lot of us put more time and energy and research into buying cars or
Mm,
phones than
yeah.
we do into finding a life partner. And
Mhm.
some of that is sometimes because there's this idea of mysticism around finding a partner sometimes that, you're just supposed to
Mhm.
meet in the street, you'll drop some books, he'll pick them up, and then boom. And I suppose it also doesn't help sometimes when you ask married people, well, how did you know they were the one? And they say, oh, when you know, you know.
Mm,
And so there is this idea that it's something that just happens.
mhm.
Whereas I think what we've both arrived at, if I'm correct, is actually it's something you need to prepare for, you need to plan for, you need to have a sort of strategy for.
Yeah.
And I think you actually need to really understand what it is you're looking for. Otherwise, how will you know when you found it, right?
Absolutely. And that's such an interesting proposition because if I reflect on my own life, I think happenstance was a very big part of how I made my decision. Circumstance just, oh, I was chosen, right? I also had I had an odd start. I mean, I had several marriage proposals before I got married. So
Oh,
in
well.
some
Okay, then.
and I mean younger sisters. But it was in a sense I turned down those proposals and you did the same thing. I mean you had several proposals, more than me, when you got married, but you turned them down for various reasons, or they sort
Don't
of
be
just
putting all my business out here.
well, I mean, come on, it's not like nobody do. It's not like it's a big secret, is it? Is it? Is it?
It was
But
until now.
was until now, now the whole world knows. But anyhow, I think let me focus on myself. You're right. I shouldn't be telling your story right for you. I tend to do that. Maybe it's older sister syndrome. But I think one of the things that I've spoken about several times, this idea of us as women being chosen. And we are just so grateful to be chosen. And we forget that we have a huge responsibility. But perhaps I'm going to even go out on a limb and say we probably have the biggest responsibility in making this decision because of how much we sacrifice and give up in this institution. Just being putting the cards out on the table. I can see the look on your face. And I'll
Yeah.
explain this in this sense. I think both parties do bring a lot to the table. I'm not diminishing the man's role. However, he's not bearing children. He's not sacrificing his body to carry someone for 9 months. He's not, it
But
is
he's
a
doing
very,
other things that may
absolutely.
be just as hard.
No, there is nothing
What?
harder than childbirth. There just isn't.
No, I think it's relative. And I suppose I don't really ascribe to the women have it harder. I think in some ways, and one reason I don't ascribe to that is I think mentally it just puts me in a place where I become some sort of victim in my marriage. And I suppose I don't like thinking that way. I think women and men both have challenges, they both face difficult things. So I don't think comparison is helpful. I like to think as my challenge of my challenges as my challenges, not in relation to
Mm.
men. I suppose that's why
Interesting.
I had that visceral reaction to what you said.
Yeah. And that's very valid. And I think that's what I love about us is that we think very differently and therefore we probably represent different points of view. And I totally disagree with that respectfully, because in my lived experience, it is not the same. I personally went through postnatal depression, which technically there are very few men who will have to experience that. Women I've heard women tell me horror stories, many of my close female friends, about what it was like to be pregnant, and there is no comparison. I'm sorry, there just isn't. Now, does that mean it makes me a victim? No, because a lot of women also say if only other women spoke honestly and frankly about what it was like, about their situations, they would have felt better prepared about what it feels like when you wanted to have a natural birth and you didn't, you couldn't, circumstances didn't allow, about how no one understands that when you are postpartum and people are expecting you to still cook and still do normal things, people aren't in your body. They don't understand what it's like to look at yourself and not recognize yourself because you have changed so much. Not only have your insides been discombobulated, your hormones are all over the place. So is it not, is it comparison? No, it's not. I believe it's fact. And I think
No.
that fact needs to be supported.
Cool. Can I just say what just clarify my position? I completely agree with everything you've said. And there are things we do as women that men will never do. I suppose where I'm pushing back is, the idea that when you enter a marriage, it's harder for
Mm.
you than a man. I think that's where I'm pushing back. I'm saying we have different challenges. But I don't think the comparison of harder than, more than, worse than, I don't think it's helpful. And I think it is
Mm.
possible for us as women to see our issues and discuss them and, and support each other because there are some things men will just never understand because of that difference. But I just
Yeah.
don't think it's helpful to see them as some sort of standard of how difficult or how easy what we have to
Mm.
do is, because I think that just builds resentment because we were made to do different things. We were made for different things. And
But
and
what's so
so
bad? But what's so bad about saying something is harder than something else? If you're a bricklayer and I'm sitting in an air-conditioned office, isn't one job physically harder than another? I mean, objectively speaking, without
Mhm.
saying one is a victim and one is not. So
Yeah, no,
factually speaking, it is harder. Men don't have to push entire human beings out of an orifice on their body.
so
We
yes,
do.
but what
So
I'm saying is you
objectively,
can say childbirth is harder for women than it is for men. You could say that, but is it a sweeping generality? Is that always the case? Now, what I'm talking about is when we talk about marriage has so
mm,
many dimensions, right?
mm,
Just to say, women suffer more in marriage than men. Now, that could be true for a majority of people, but I
mm.
suppose I
It's
just
not true for
have
everyone. I'm
trouble.
not making generalizations by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I think
You know,
it's not true for everyone, and we can't speak for men. We don't know what they go through. They might think they've got it just as hard, but I suppose my point is that's all relative, and the
mm,
comparison does not really help. Now, is it an objective reality that, for instance, I can say, "Oh, I had a tough time
mm.
bearing children," or had a tough time after I gave birth. That's an objective reality, but I don't think comparing that to how my husband experienced the same thing is necessarily useful. I suppose that's what I'm saying.
So the topic is how to choose whom to marry. So we do apologize for segueing. That's probably going to happen a lot
We do
when
this a
we
lot.
when we get into like heated um, and very diverse points of view. But I like it. I like Nancy because she challenges me. She holds absolutely no, she holds
Right.
no prisoners, takes no prisoners, but she speaks her mind, and I think that's important. And I think maybe we should have another topic about this because there's also a very interesting statistic that says that married men are happier than married women, and single women are happier than married women. But we'll discuss that at another time. And I think there are reasons for that, both social in terms of our expectations and all of that. But it doesn't apply to everybody. And I think the point of this conversation is that there are happy marriages, there are good marriages, there are marriages where men are giving as much as women, and God is at the center, and they are thriving and looking after each other and really wanting the best for each other. But how do you choose a partner who will give you that? How do you make that decision? What are the things you need to look out for? And I think the first one, as Nancy said, is to know what you want. Before even that, I will go a step further to say you need to know who you are. You need to know
Mm.
yourself. Now, I'll add a caveat. We never really truly know ourselves because different circumstances bring out different versions of ourselves. So to know
Mm.
yourself completely and also is it's a process, right? Probably
Mhm.
know more about yourself at 30 than you did at 20 and so on and so forth. But I think one thing that doesn't change for me is establishing your values. Because even as you grow and you change, your values will rarely change. For example, if he has to be God fearing, if he's got to be spiritual, if he's got to have someone he answers to, a higher power, that's value based and it will not change at 20, 30, or 40. Well, I guess it depends on how your life goes, right? If you're planning to become an atheist at 50. But I think the idea of knowing yourself, or at least knowing your values, is something everyone needs to take time out to do because a lot of the times we kind of say, we'll figure it out once we're in it. When I'm married, I'll figure out what my values are, or I'll figure out if we're aligned. We'll make it work. Love is enough. Love is a choice. You hear that a lot, right? And it truly is. You have to wake up every morning choosing this person. But it's really not enough if you don't know yourself, don't know your issues, your
So
trauma.
just make it practical. Why does it matter that you know yourself? What is the end result of not knowing yourself? And why is it better if you do?
Great question. So I'll illustrate with an example. I am a 20-something-year-old and I introspect and I
No, you're
realize,
not.
no, I'm telling a
I know.
story.
I know.
You said that with so much like relish. Ah, oh goodness, you were the mean girl in school. No, I'm kidding. So if I'm a 25-year-old girl and I'm perhaps haven't done any self-reflection, or let's look at the other side. I've done some self-reflection, and I realized that one thing about me is I don't do well with criticism. Uh, I have soft feelings. Let's say that this is self-awareness now. When someone criticizes me, I take it to heart. Now, if I know this about myself, and the man I'm interested in and want to marry is a man who has absolutely no tact. He is unkind and he dresses his unkindness as I'm straightforward. He's brusque. Or maybe he's not even unkind, but his nature is just that he's brusque. So he doesn't actually talk politely to you or nicely to you. Do you know what's going to happen because you have such different communication styles? When you get married, every time he brings up a genuine problem or he wants to criticize you, he's going to bring it up in a way that is going to hurt your feelings. Over time, it's going to build resentment. He will wonder why you're resentful and your communication is short. Now, this seems like a small thing, but it's a fundamental thing. So if I were this woman who doesn't take criticism very well, you are better off looking for a kind man. Someone who will speak to you in a way that doesn't hurt your feelings, someone who's
But what if
emotionally.
it's an area of growth? What if you do need to grow a thicker skin and therefore, you know, God says, well, I'm going to give you someone who, isn't going to coddle you, is going to tell you the truth so you can develop a thicker skin.
Look, that happens too. But the topic is how to choose whom to marry. So you can decide to sail those rough waters, and when you're 40 and getting divorced, you can decide, oh, God put me in that man's life to learn a hard lesson. And yes, you will have learned your lesson and you will have grown. But would you rather maybe learn to work on yourself through self-awareness rather than through being forced through a traumatic event? I think that's the difference. because both are not necessarily wrong. I just feel one is a bit harder than the other. And maybe if someone tells you that this is something to look for, you can avoid that pitfall, if that makes sense. But if you
Mhm.
had to choose a criteria, this area of sort of self-awareness and knowing yourself, how does that resonate for you? And is that something that resonates for you? Period.
Yes, it does, because I think one of the shifts that is very helpful when you're thinking about picking your spouse is this idea of moving away from finding the one to becoming the one. And why I say that is because we often think about what we want people to do for us in a marriage. We think, I want this, I want that, I want that. But we hardly, ever think about what we have to do in the marriage, and the fact
Mm.
that this is actually a contract, it's an
Yeah.
institution that you enter, certain things will be expected of you. And you have to think about whether you're ready to meet those expectations and whether you're ready to make the sacrifices that marriage does demand. And so I think, if you're in a waiting period, waiting to meet the right person, get married to them, I think one of the best things you can do with that time is just focus on becoming the one,
Yeah.
rather than finding the one.
Mm.
um, I was always struck by the fact the Bible says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing. And I think, they could have said he who finds a girlfriend that he marries, but it says he who finds a wife, that you are a wife already when you are found. And to me, that is quite interesting because it means there's a mentality, there is a way of being that you can achieve, and that's kind of what somebody finds in you, right? So in a practical sense, I think that it's very easy to be quite selfish if you are, you know a reasonably successful person who is able to do whatever they want when they want. I don't know if you found this, but I found that marriage really, really forced me to be a lot less selfish. And I didn't even realize there were ways in which I was selfish, because when you're doing what you want, when you want, however you want, you're not really, there's not much selflessness demanded of you. And so learning to be more accommodating and that sort of thing, that's one of the things marriage demands. And I just think that that perspective of understanding what marriage is going to demand of you, and so focusing on becoming that person before you're forced into these very rough waters of marriage. And now, oh my goodness, what is this? Why is there so much I need to give? Because you never really thought about it before. You're only thinking about what you're going to get. I think
Mm.
that's a really important thing to do in terms of how you prepare yourself and the self awareness. Because then, if you understand that you are a selfish person, that's something you need to work on. And even when it does pop up in the marriage, you can say, well, this is something I'm working on, and have honest conversations about that. And
That's
yeah, those are
that,
mine.
yeah. I think that's very true. I think one of the things that surprised me the most in my marriage, because I'm very outspoken in general, and I think it
Never.
surprised.
You really?
Oh, stop. Is the fact that I don't advocate for myself. I find it very difficult to actually be very clear and very straightforward about what I want, because I feel like I don't have a right to take. I want to give, 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 give. But when it comes to myself, I had some really maladaptive ways of getting, in fact, manipulative ways of getting what I wanted. One, I expected people to sort of read my mind and know that if I'm sulking, this is the reason why I'm sulking. I wanted to go out
You
for
know,
dinner, pick me up for
I
dinner.
hear that a lot, when we talk about sort of, women and men in relationships. And I realized that at some point that I was actually expecting, that my mind would be read in relationships. I don't know why. Like, what is that? Where does that come from?
Well, it's quite simple, really. I think the principal concept is that a lot of us grew up with, and why it's called maladaptive is you didn't grow out of it. So it worked at some point, but then you suffered from arrested development. When you're a baby and a child, you can't speak. So people have to anticipate your needs. Now, there should come a part in your milestones and your growth where you're now able to advocate for your needs without people anticipating. But if people still don't give you your needs when you grow out of this stage, what do? You regress because you've vocalized your need, but someone isn't giving you what you need as a child. So then you quickly realize, oh gosh, even when I speak up, nobody's catering for my needs, and the world isn't a safe place. And we internalize all these things. So when we get married, we and subconsciously say, aha, now I found someone whose job it is. In fact, all our friends were there. We swore before God till death do us part. This is the person who must do the job of my parents. And so, therefore, you must anticipate my every need. That's your job. Your job is to fix me, make me feel good about myself. And in so doing, because you haven't done any work and you're not introspecting and you're not aware, it was so difficult for me to even say things like, I feel sad. I need someone to comfort me. Could you be that person? To make my emotional needs known, and sometimes to even be wise enough to know that this emotional need will not be met by thy husband. Take it elsewhere.
That's what
And
girlfriends.
that's what girlfriends are for, right? And not always. Like there are some marriages where it is a safe space, where your husband can be an emotional rock for you. It takes hard work and it takes both parties really wanting that kind of relationship. Hence that checklist you talked about, Nancy, right? Of knowing yourself and what you want. Do you want a close relationship with someone who's emotionally available to you? Then maybe that's something you need to make sure you can see in your potential partner. But even better, ask him if he can meet that need. And that is where it's so difficult for us. He may not know what you're talking about, in which case, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. He can't, right?
Yeah. Um, so I have a slightly different view on that. Also, there was something else I was going to say about something you said, but I'll come back to that later. But I think what sort of came to mind when you were talking about that is this idea of the perfect match. Because as we're talking about finding what you want, I think the idea that there is a perfect match is also flawed, and we need to be careful with that. So, saying I'm going to find someone who responds perfectly to my love languages, as people call them, or to my needs, or who's going to be, I think, yes, the traditional view is that the right person will be a perfect fit. But I don't know. I feel like the best partnerships are actually the ones that facilitate healthy growth. Because, there are some things that your partner may say to you that you would much rather not hear. And you don't feel like that's a safe space or your comfort bubble. But as you sort of grow together, you find out that these things are actually helping you and making you a better person. So I think, rightly, as you say, it's good to be aware of yourself and what you need. But at the same time, and I think this is why it's so important to involve God, because he sees things you can't. He knows things you can't. He knows you in ways that you cannot even fathom yourself. The Bible says the heart is wicked, the heart is deceitful above all things. Who can understand it? We don't understand ourselves. So, in my view, that's why it's just so important to have someone who does know everything, who does know who you'll be in 20 years and what you'll need in 20 years, and see ahead of that in order to yeah, even help you make the decisions where you can't see it all now. It doesn't quite make sense, but it might make sense later. So I suppose all I'm saying is, I think the traditional idea of you find the perfect person, maybe it's better to say you find the perfect person to grow with. I think that's what I would say. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think there are certain hard characteristics that we have to be realistic about that make that person the perfect person for you. And I think maybe the defining of a perfect person for you is where we didn't spend a lot of time. And I completely agree with your definition. It's someone who will challenge you. But I think if you're bringing, and this is the thing that I've found, is that if both parties are there to give, then you're good. But if one,
Absolutely.
but if one is there to take and the other one is trying to give, it's an imbalance because this one will just be taking all the time, and the person who's giving all the time is totally depleted and is not growing and is sacrificing themselves, and it's just unhealthy and untenable. If both of you are like, I'm here to give, but and you're out giving each other, like, I brought this for you, babe, back from work, here's some flowers. And she's like, I made you a great meal. Like, if everyone's giving, do you see, like, the tension is good, the balance is there, it's flowing, we're all trying. And I wanted to just say something that's really important. I think it's going to sound very silly and trite, but I think women need to marry men who are kind. This is such an important quality. And we don't talk about it enough. We think about money, we think about looks, we think about provision, financial security, will my kids, but it impacts every area of your life, even how you parent your children. So many women are too stressed out to even be physically available for their children because they're dealing with an unkind person. And I think that this is what I mean by the right person. There is such a thing as the right person. And that right person will counsel you not in harshness, not in invalidation, not that you are less than. They will counsel you because they love you. Their way will be, Nancy, that thing you did, this is my thoughts on it. This is how it made me feel. Not attacking you, but telling you, and that will make you feel, oh, I didn't even realize that I was doing that, because a lot of these things that we do, we're not malicious. We are just maladaptive. We are doing things because we've been doing these things like this for 30 odd years. So when we met you and we married you, we didn't know our bad behavior. That's why we married you, to be a mirror to us, counsel us in love and patience and kindness so that we can grow together. Because be sure, if you're going to counsel me, I should be allowed to counsel you too. Because a lot of African men out here who cannot be told anything, they are perfect, and that's what I'm saying. Like, choosing is down to those values, down to those characters. And I think it's also really fundamental that Nancy mentioned something, that God is in this decision, that you are making this decision with him, that you are consulting him and being in silence. I read something today that I just wanted to share that's, I think, is profound. I think it was on TikTok, and this guy was saying he can vouch or put his hand on the Bible, whatever, that 99% of us have never spent an hour by ourselves in silence. No cameras, videos, phones, whatever, books, music, coffee, drinks, alcohol, just you and silence. And I scrolled down the comments as usual, and someone said, I think what you're talking about is listening to the Holy Spirit. Boom. Like, it wasn't complicated, right? We take a lot of worldly principles, meditation, etc., when really what we're saying is, can you hear God's voice? So imagine if you met a man and you put yourself in your room for 1 hour, and the first 10, 15 minutes will be probably hell on earth. You'll think about laundry, whatever you didn't do. Your mind will travel. But if you can have the discipline to quiet your mind and say, no, we're not going anywhere. This may be uncomfortable for you, but we're going to stay here for the full hour. Likely after 30 minutes or so, you will start to feel God's voice or hear God's voice. And at the end of that, you might even start to feel, I'm being, misled by all the worldly symbols of success. He's got a good job, or he's got money, or his family seems legit, all of these outside symbols of success. But in his heart, this is not the man for me. And I will listen to God's counsel and God's wisdom. And I think that if there's anything we could share, if anything I could share, I think that would be the clincher, because there's so many other areas we can talk about, but I think we will be talking about the branches of the tree and not the root of the tree, because I think everything stems from there. Is he kind? Is he good? Are your values aligned? Is he going to, be the kind of person that it will speak your love language, right? Are you going to be able to have anything in common? Will you have things that you can do together, fun stuff? Are you outgoing? Is he a homebody? I think all of these things the world tells us are really, they're just symptoms. The deeper question is, what is your soul agreeing to? What is God saying about you and this person? And maybe they're there to teach you a lesson. Who are we to know? So you'll marry them and the marriage will be terrible and end in divorce, but in there is your lesson and your growth. Who am I to say? I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I'm not God. But I think there's definitely wisdom in silence, and there are answers in silence. and in hearing
Mm.
God's voice.
No, absolutely. I think the key there that you mentioned, is really about not following your heart, which is the message we sort of get from popular culture,
Mm,
but sort of heart, head, and Holy Spirit alignment, because I think all those things have to sort of work together. Um, I think in a good, healthy choice, you don't sort of abandon your head and go with your heart. You don't
mm,
abandon your heart and go with
yeah,
your head.
go ahead,
You-
yeah.
And
And
importantly,
your
you keep the
guts,
Holy. What's that?
and your guts. Because there was an interesting study that said that when asked, close to, I think, I don't quote me on this, but it was close to like eight, it a staggering amount, close to 80 or 85% of people were asked, when did you know that you shouldn't marry this person? And most people said, before I married, before the wedding. That's shocking.
Mm,
Which means
mm,
you knew even before the wedding this person wasn't the
yeah.
one. But like Nancy's saying, either logic ruled the day over the heart, or the heart ruled over logic. And maybe
Mm,
God was at the center of that decision. Yeah.
yeah, that alignment is so important, like you say. And when one thing feels off, there usually is a reason, and it's important
Mm.
to listen to that reason.
Yes.
Um, I think what I used as my guiding, my guiding what? Give me the word.
North Star.
Guiding principle. Yeah, as my guiding principle, or one of the guiding principles for this was, let the peace of God rule in your hearts. And I think, I used to think that means let the peace of God, rule, like be the paramount thing in your hearts. But I realized it meant that let the peace of God rule the way a judge rules, let it decide. And so
Mm,
I've often found that in situations where I don't feel the peace of God, it is
mm,
deciding for me. If I am, like you said, able to sit and listen
mm.
and, try and put aside my own swirling thoughts and what people are
Yeah.
telling me, what the world
Yeah.
is telling me, then I give God the opportunity, his peace to rule, to literally judge and decide. And that hasn't, I don't think that's ever failed me really. If I take the time to sit and think about that. And so for me, one of the big green flags was just, having that peace
Mm,
around, my decision of who to marry. And I think that's just so much more reliable than the fireworks or the
yeah.
bombs or all
Yeah.
the stuff that looks really good in a Hollywood movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's just something so powerful in that, in that quiet peace, because the heart is deceitful. Feelings are fleeting and they can be here today, gone tomorrow. But there's that underlying peace that I think does a really good job of pointing us towards what's really happening underneath. Yeah.
To draw on that same thread around how culture and what you talked about, the feelings, the emotions, and all of that, it's interesting that what that does, whether not overtly, but actually what it does, it's encouraging us to remain uneducated about the art and science of a healthy relationship. So,
Mm.
your romantic feelings is what guides you. You rely on fate, luck, following your instincts. My favorite one, hoping for the best. And as I always say, hope is not a strategy, right? God is a strategy, because that's not hope, that's faith, totally different things. But think about how our culture, even, well, not our culture, but Western culture, that has now sort of been imbibed by especially upwardly mobile men and women, mocks the wise and diligent search for a partner, mocks it. Things like arranged marriages, which, by the way, have been proven to outlast non-arranged marriages, right? Because apparently people know you better than you know yourself, especially if those
Mm.
people raised you, which for me is fascinating, right? For example, you see it all the time that we are the worst judges of people's intentions for us, especially when emotions and feelings get involved. How many times have you told a girlfriend, "Oh, he didn't call you," and you're trying to be supportive, but in your head you're like, why are you still talking to this guy? He obviously doesn't care about you, but if the tables were turned, you wouldn't do any better. Then there's also the biological clock, that bias, settle down before you're too old, whatever that means. I mean, are you ever really too old to be with your life partner? People have met their soulmates at 60 and 70, but why do we still hang on to this thing that I'm biologically, if you have to have children, yes. Like anything else that we've conditioned ourselves to agree that it takes time and effort, for some reason, marriage shouldn't. It shouldn't take time and it shouldn't take effort. If he's the one for you, you guys should gel. You should have chemistry. You shouldn't have to work so hard. I don't know how many times I've heard that. That if you're working too hard, then you're forcing it. And I'm just like, that is so interesting, right? And I think that, just pulling on that thread of cultural ideas and things that we buy into that are completely wrong, and then segueing from that is I just add a last tip about this thing of knowing yourself. Think about yourself, Nancy. When did you get good at riding a bicycle? Through practice, right? You practice on a regular basis. Voila, you know how to ride a bicycle. So when someone says, "What do you want in a marriage?" At times it can be hard if you haven't been married. I don't know. I don't know what this institution is like. I can guess. So we're really, really bad at answering the question, what do you want out of a marriage? But that's why the question should be, who are you? What are your values? Because that's a better way to predict that you'll be able to handle what marriage will throw at you, because it will throw stuff at you. Right? But the idea that we as human beings only really truly get good at things through practicing on a regular basis means that you have to spend time reflecting on your character. My sister said something to me the other day. She said, "Sometimes you're not very reliable." And I was like, me? Because I had predicated a lot of my, what do you call it? Personality, or when you've built identity. I had predicated a lot of my identity on being reliable. That's the only way to build a multi-million dollar business. Do you think unreliable people build strong businesses? I mean, these are all the objections running in my head when she said that. Then when I sat back, I asked her, "What do you mean? Give me an actual example." And then I realized I can be very unreliable in personal relationships. Not so much business, but in personal relationships, yeah, I can be a bit flaky. And I think it's that taking stock of yourself that allows you to even prepare people ahead of time. Say, "You know what, there's this thing, I'm working on it. When you see it, let me know, grow me, make me better, and I'll make you better." And that becomes the deal. Imagine how beautiful and healthy a relationship can be when each of you is championing the other to be better. It's incredible. But through
Yeah,
love and kindness.
absolutely. And like most things in life, there's such a balance, isn't there? Because we sort of have to balance that idea with, we don't necessarily know what marriage is going to be like, and therefore what we need in it. But at the same time, there are things, that we can prejudge. And I
Yeah.
think the Bible has the best advice for one thing you must always do if you are looking at someone and considering,
Mm.
oh my goodness,
Bless
excuse
you.
me, and considering whether that person can be a life partner.
Yeah.
And the Bible's, oh my
And
goodness,
again,
excuse me, I'm so sorry. But yes,
someone once told me that you should never apologize for biology. And then I was like,
okay,
so if you fart in public, you must not apologize. I was like, yeah, no, don't. That's your body doing what the body needs to do.
you had to take it there.
Yeah, that's me. I take it where it doesn't need to go. But bless you, no apology needed, as you were saying. I'm gonna just
Biology.
turn the light. It's a little dark in here. Yeah, you were saying?
Yeah, so I was saying that I think, culturally, chemistry, as we said, romantic feelings, like that's probably for many people the biggest indicator or the thing
Mm,
they look up for. But if what you are trying to build is a stable, God centered, faith filled, kind, long lasting marriage, then the Bible tells you what to look for. It says in Matthew 7:16, by their fruit you will know them. You have got to be laser focused on what is the fruit in this person's life. If they are not showing the fruit of patience, the fruit of kindness, the fruit of being forgiving, the fruit of being, understanding, it's not going to magically appear at some point later on in your marriage just because he has a six pack, is very tall, and drives the right car. It's not going to appear. And I don't know about you, but I think when you're married, goodness, you will not think about the six pack or the fast car. The kindness matters so much.
Very
The
much on a
ability of
day-to-day
someone
basis.
on a
Yeah,
day-to-day basis, it's those
yeah.
things that really count. Just how does
And
he
the
talk to me
capacity
when he picks
for
up the
some,
phone? You know?
yes, the capacity for someone to tell you what they need. Do you know how massive that is? Do you know how people will have you out here dancing around hoops to figure them out, their needs, just because they can't. They've never been taught how to communicate their needs. And so now they're doing all sorts of weird things when it could have been resolved. I think most cases of infidelity actually didn't even need to be cases of infidelity if people could learn how to communicate what it is they're looking for. Because why are you in a marriage? You want a safe space. And the moment it doesn't feel safe, people start looking outward. But it's so hard to create that if you can't communicate with your partner in a healthy way, like you're saying. And those fruits, you're right. You're absolutely right. They nowadays we call them red flags. We have all sorts of names for them. But you're right. You're so right. Those fruits show up and we ignore them. Or we think worse, we're the ones who are going to change them. They'll change for us because we are so special.
Yeah, we make all sorts of excuses. And I was thinking about it and saying, that is such an interesting thing. You shall know them by your fruit, their fruit. Like if you really drill that down, it's saying something very basic because you look at all the stuff we use to know people. Yeah. When you meet someone, what are you doing? You're asking your friends about them. You're looking at his job. You're looking at his car. Um, you're looking at how he treats you, how he talks to you, what he says.
Mm,
But you may not be looking at the fruit. I mean, if this person says, that I pledge I'm going to marry you and I'm going to be committed to you, but they've never held down a job for more than 2 weeks. They are very flaky with their friends. They can barely show up for anything.
mm,
That is fruit that is telling you something
mm,
already, and to kind
mm.
of ignore that sort of thing in your own peril. But I think we sort of dissociate sometimes. We think those things are not related, but they really are.
I had a friend who told me once that this guy she was dating, they were talking about ghosting. And he was
Mm-hmm.
like, "Oh, nothing wrong with ghosting, that there are some situations where you just have to ghost people. In fact, it's the kindest thing you can do." And she went on to have a relationship with this person, and guess what? He ghosted
He
her.
ghosted her. Well,
And I was like, did you not see those fruits when you were like, but it's true. And this is why I think we need to have these conversations in communities where we can actually share these things. Because it's crazy how just you can't make those smart decisions when you're being hijacked
yeah,
emotionally. And
that's
if
what
you're
it
not
feels
looking
like.
for them, right? If you haven't already pre-planted this idea of I'm going to be
Mm,
looking for the fruits, right?
mm,
Nancy said, look for the fruits. Okay, let's sit down. Let's get to know each other. What are your fruits? What do you
mhm,
have to show, right? Consistently. I think the last thing I want to, can see we're almost out of time, but the last thing I want to say in conjunction with how to choose whom to marry related to this idea of fruits is patterns. I think life really lives, and I think this is also God's design. I've heard it
mm,
explained in so many ways that everything follows a pattern, and that's how God has designed nature. Even when you look at the seasons and all of that, there are patterns of predictability. We don't know that the sun will rise tomorrow, but it does, and we thank God. I think human beings, because we are also created of God, we show patterns, and
mhm,
unfortunately, we are not taught how to spot and then use those patterns to predict the future. I love what you said about he's not magically going to change because you're married. In fact, it will get worse.
Oh yeah.
Whatever it is you see. Yeah, that's sort of just the way. And I think
Mm.
a lot of times we ignore that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this friend of mine who was ghosted, um, she went years without reconnecting with this person. So actually, he low key ghosted her and then came back to her, right? Pattern. So he talked about the fact that he had no issue with ghosting. He low key
Yeah.
actually did it, right? Which means that he is going to be unreliable. And do you want to be with someone unreliable? If you're unreliable, okay, then the two of you, good match there. But if you want someone reliable and you are reliable, i.e., your fruits that you're giving are not matching those fruits, and you
So
don't actually deserve it.
I think there's something we really need to address here because I think a lot of the time it's not that we don't know these things, but sometimes we don't feel like there is an option. I think there are many women in situations where you know the guy is this, he's that, but what are your options, right? And I think there is maybe a lot of that where there may be people who feel that this is the best they can do, this is the best they can get. You look around at the pool and there are
Mm,
plenty of fish in the sea, but they're all really bony or whatever it is.
yeah.
And, I think that's a real fear that
Mm,
needs to be tackled because people aren't dumb. They're not, they can see these things. But when you dig deeper, sometimes you see that at the root of it is a very real, and I don't think this is an unfounded fear,
mm.
that they may never meet the one. What do you say to someone who says, look, I know all this. Um, I know that he's not the most reliable, but
Yeah.
I've done the math. This is as good as it's going to get. It's
Mm.
better.
Then nothing. It's gonna sound harsh. I mean, I've been there. Maybe not in a marriage situation, but in other situations where I've accepted less than I deserved. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's not the answer anyone wants to hear, because it takes courage. It takes courage to say, I don't deserve this. And even if I'm going to spend the rest of my life alone, it'll be better than me accepting less than what God created for me. But I have a feeling He's out there. You know what astounds me? What astounds me is that there are a lot of good men out there. A lot. A lot. They just don't always look like what you're looking for at 20 or 25. But the truth is, there are men who are yearning for close relationships. There are men who want women who can communicate because they can communicate. So, really, it's about just sitting with that fear, because it's a fear, isn't it? How do we classify it as anything but? It's a fear. It's a fear
Mm,
that I will not be enough, I am not enough. And it speaks right into the whole thing of I was chosen.
mm,
What if I'm never chosen again? This could be
mhm,
it, right? And it also comes from a place of, funny enough, you're going into the marriage to receive. That's why
mm.
you're so scared and fearful, because all you're going to do there is to take.
That's an interesting point. Like, has anyone ever been worried that I may not find another person to give to or to help?
Right?
Like, do
It
people go to
totally,
sleep at night worrying that there may not
yes.
be another
Oh
person on this
God,
planet
I
that
must
I
wake
can
up
be of
tomorrow and there's
service
no,
to?
right? What if there's no beggar on the street to give some alms? What if there's nobody that I can and it totally turns the tables. Because when I think of when I wanted to get married and I was so excited about the fact that there was someone to give to be there for, to support, to be there ride or die, you won't see it the same way. Because now you know that that person who gets you, oh, they're so lucky. And you're gonna give everything with everything. And that fear is gone. It's like, oh
Mm,
no, they're gonna lose out on me giving them. Oh, too bad. But not I'm going to lose out on someone providing for me, giving me children, me. I don't want to be old
mm,
with cats and how will the world see me. All of that is about you. It's just about
mm,
you. So it's such a different perspective. And I think that's the power of confronting our fears, is that if we strip them down layer by layer by layer by layer, we expose them for what they really are. And then we can just switch that perspective completely. And guess what? When that perspective shifts, you then attract the right people because your energy is vibrating totally differently. And God is like, yep,
Like,
you're ready.
oh, just on that, I think I remember something that one of my really good friends said to me when we were having one of our, oh, what is this life sessions, And I think I said something to her like, I don't see this for me. I don't think because I pride myself on being, very practical and rational and reasonable. And I said, I don't see this for
A
me.
boring. Hmm.
Whatever. But yeah, I said, I don't see it. I've looked around. I don't see how it's going to happen that I'm going to meet the person who's going to meet all my criteria
Long
and
laundry list. Yeah.
a long laundry list, and without it coming with, some sort of downside. I just don't see it. And she said something to me that was so simple, but so
Mm.
profound, and actually carried me through my period of waiting and gave me hope. And like you said, because I was in a different space, I was in a hopeful space, it did happen. And
Mm.
what she said to me was, but God created you. So why wouldn't He create the person that fits you? And it's such a simple thing. And it's so obvious. But honestly, in that moment, it made me realize I had switched the focus from what could provide for me, if
Yep.
that makes sense. And I hadn't put God as a loving father, as someone who wants to give us good things. The
Mm.
Bible says all good things come from God, the Father of heavenly lights, in whom there is no shadow of turning. So even a good husband comes from God. And I'd switched my focus off that and looked at demographics, looked at my age, looked at, you, everything around that shows you, oh, the demographics say that if you're single over this age, it's not going to happen for you.
Mm. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, my head was getting turned by that. But when she said that, it just reset my focus. And I said,
Mm.
I don't need to listen to all that. What I need to focus on is what does God have for me? And if this
Yeah.
is something He has, ordained for me, written for me, desired for me, then it's going to happen. And it
Yes.
did. My goodness, yes, I found a unicorn, according to the statistics. But
According to the statistics, yes, you found a unicorn. I mean, who finds an unmarried, single, successful, God-fearing, sorry, I shouldn't like
lots,
reveal it,
yeah,
well,
no, but
wealthy, do you know, like it's like the world tells you, no, no, these men don't exist past this
mm.
age. Like you're either gonna find that he's got baggage, or he's got he's leaving his third marriage. He's got, but let me tell you, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I cannot state this enough because I have seen this in my life. I have seen so many people live into the lives that they have created for themselves through doubting God, through not listening, through just believing every other voice. And then they sit there and wonder, but my life sucks. Well, all you focus on all day is how bad it's going to be. And I've seen people's lives turn around not in months or weeks, in minutes. You know,
Mm,
I'll give you one last example. Next time you go to church, instead of praying for yourself to find the right man, pray for your friend who's looking. Don't pray for
mm,
yourself, and mean
mm,
it genuinely and from the bottom of your heart. Put them in your prayer. See how fast it happens for you. God already knows your heart. But when you release your attachment to the outcome, that is now faith. And I don't know how to explain it, but every time I've done that, I've seen a move. And I'm like, wow, that's all I had to do is do less. You
mm.
know? It's so
Yeah.
crazy.
No, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there with that point about surrender. And I think that's the key. You have to surrender this desire to Him. And the focus, if you're waiting, just delight yourself in the Lord. Because
Yeah,
the Bible says, delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart. And
right.
that doesn't mean He's an ATM vending machine. Giving you the desires of your heart doesn't mean that you desire something and then God gives it to you. It means He will give you what to desire. He will literally turn your heart. And if the best thing for you is to just desire to live a happy, fulfilled life, helping others, even if there's no, romantic partner or marriage in it, then the desire of your heart will be that he will change it. But if he does give you the desire for a partner, how will he not fulfill it, right? So as long as you are
100%.
aligned,
Yeah.
as long as you are aligned and putting God first, like you said, praying his prayers, not yours, asking God, who do you want me to pray for? What do you want me to pray for? What do you want me to do? Um, how can I delight myself in you? He will give you the desire of your heart. And I think we can both agree that
I
100%.
I
We have
have a
seen that.
testimony.
We've
I have a
seen that.
testimony. Sorry?
No,
You
I was
have
just saying we can agree that we've seen him work in that way.
absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I have a testimony just weeks ago. I went to church and I really had this thing on my heart. I was like, God, I need to pray for this thing. And as soon as I stepped into church, he said, you're here to pray for this woman. There was a woman who was called to the front, she had cancer. And he just told me, this is why you're here. And I was like, yep, I get it. Because suddenly my problems were this small. I mean, they were still big when I went back and picked them up outside of church. But in that moment, he just ministered. And it's like you just hear this voice that tells you, no, you're here to pray for this woman. That's why you're here. That's why you drove all those hours and you're here now, do the thing. And that's all I did. And I can tell you, when I left, I did not feel like that was a waste of my time. I did not feel like I came here to get something and I didn't get it. And I think that's how he moves, just moment by moment, minute by minute, day by day. And you get better at hearing and being obedient. But I think you have to have the desire to hear him. I think that's really for me what changed. Is that for a long time I just didn't even want to. It was just like, yeah, you're there, you know. But really having that asking, just being in the middle of your day and saying, I really want, talk to me. What should I do? I talk to him like a buddy, like, okay, what do I do now? What do you want from me? That desire to know, it changes everything. And that's how to choose whom to marry.
Ask God is the short answer.
We could have done this entire thing in one
Would
minute.
have done it in in 2 minutes, but where's the fun in that? But yeah, really, ask God.
That's kind of it. Yeah. So thank you if you're watching this and you have any thoughts or questions, you can drop them in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you, ideas, anything that resonated, anything you want to add. We also want to learn from you. We've also decided like we have so many ideas that it's always hard for Nancy and I when we're prepping to only stick to one thing. So we're literally going to compile 40 of these into like a nice ebook that's convenient. And we'll be putting that link in the chat for you to subscribe to if you're interested, so we can send you the whole list at the end of this series.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time and your attention, and God bless.